Greetings, everyone, and welcome to this 11th annual World Wetlands Day celebration here in Waterloo. So my name is Philippe Van Capellen. I'm a professor at the Department of Earth and Environmental Sciences at the University of Waterloo, and I co-lead here the Ecohydrology Research Group together with Dr. Feridun Rezanezad. And so our research group focuses on land and water resources, and particularly has a focus on water quality and soil quality. So as I said, my name is Philippe Van Capellen. I'm a professor here in Waterloo, and I'd like to start with a land acknowledgement. And so we are here gathered at the University of Waterloo, which is located on the Haldimand Tract. That's the land that was promised to the Haudenosaunee of the Six Nations of the Grand River. And it's within the territory of the neutral Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee peoples. So our ability to be living and working here now in Waterloo region, in Ontario, in Canada, is a direct outcome of policies of expulsion and assimilation of Indigenous peoples during the time of settlement and confederation and since then. The harm of these policies are many and are still being felt today in Indigenous communities. We therefore have a responsibility to acknowledge and understand this history and the current experiences of First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. And for this understanding to inform the work that we do, so that first we can stop perpetuating the damages of colonization, and second, to begin to repair them. And so land acknowledgements are just one small first step in doing this work. Now, since this is World Wetlands Day, well, theoretically World Wetlands Day is tomorrow, I would ask everybody to take a moment to recognize the key roles of Indigenous peoples that they play in understanding, nurturing, and protecting our shared wetlands here in Canada, but also around the world. We're also lucky today to have Susan Glashauer here. So I'd like to call on her. She's currently the president of the Society of Wetland Scientists, the Canada chapter. And so she can give us a quick introduction to the chapter and maybe convince some of you to join it. And on the tables, you also have a little flyer.
Well, he took the words out of my mouth because I'm trying to drum up membership. So there are some newsletters around. We just baked that yesterday, so it's very fresh. There are 3 important points in there. One of them is that we're looking for volunteers to help out with our board. So the Society of Wetland Scientists is an international organization. It's based, the mothership is in the US. And the Canada chapter, we're trying to grow it so that it's a good combination, a good home for scientists and practitioners and regulators and everybody interested in wetlands. So please think about joining if you haven't. If you're a student, it's very cheap. And so if you would like to volunteer, please get in touch with me, and my email address is on there. You can use the hours that you spend helping out. We're looking especially for people to help with social media. We'd like to get a social media platform going. You can use your hours towards becoming accredited as a professional wetland scientist, which is a very good thing. Okay, so the other point is that on February 21st, there is going to be a webinar by Lorna Harris, who's a recognized peatland scientist. So you're welcome to join us for that. And the third point, very important, is that the RE3 conference is coming up. So if you get your SWS membership, you get a discount for signing up for the RE3 conference. The deadline for abstracts has been extended to February 6th, so there is still time. Get your abstracts in. And I'll be around. I'll stay a little bit after if you're interested in knowing a little bit more about SWS. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. So as most of you probably know, World Wetlands Day is an international day adopted by the United Nations General Assembly to celebrate and heighten awareness of the critical importance of wetlands to people and the planet. World Wetlands Day is celebrated every 2nd of February since 1997 in recognition of the Convention on Wetlands, known as the Ramsar Convention, which was signed in 1971 as an international treaty. So each year, the Ramsar Committee chooses a different theme for World Wetlands Day. And the theme today, or for this year, is Wetland Restoration. And so it highlights the huge urgent need to prioritize wetland restoration, and it calls for an entire generation to take steps to revive and restore degraded wetlands. As you also probably know, roughly 6% of the Earth's land surface is covered by wetlands, and of this 6%, a quarter is located in Canada. So our country, therefore, has a special responsibility to protect this important natural capital, not just for Canadians, but for people all over the world. So since 2013, my research group, the Ecohydrology Research Group here, has been organizing a symposium to celebrate World Wetlands Day. And so this year, we'd also like to thank the Waterloo Wetlands Laboratory led by Dr. Rebecca Rooney and the Wetlands Soils and Greenhouse Gas Exchange Lab led by Dr. Maria Strack for their help in making this event possible. And by the way, Dr. Rebecca Rooney, which was programmed to be here tonight, unfortunately could not join us. So since the start, a key part of the World Wetlands Day celebrations here at Waterloo has been the Distinguished Public Lecture. And so I've put here a list of all the distinguished lectures we had since 2013. And as you can see, or if you recognize some of the names, you'll see that it's a very diverse group of people, not just people from academia, but also people from NGOs, organizations, etc. And so I would like to point out the 2019 speaker here, Diana Kopansky, who is actually amongst us today and has been for the past 2 days. And she will actually moderate the lecture and the panel discussion that will follow the lecture. Please note that the event is being filmed and it's also broadcasted online via Zoom. And so we have a significant virtual audience also here tonight. And so after the event, this recording will be available, will be shared, and will be available to anyone who wants it. On a practical note, we will have a questions and answer session after the distinguished lecture and again after the panel discussion. So please keep your questions until then. And for our virtual audience, you can also use the chat function on Zoom to pose your questions. So with that, I'd like to introduce the moderator for today's event, Diana Kopansky. So Diana is the UN environment expert on landscape and biodiversity and the coordinator of the Global Peatland Initiative. She joined us as a distinguished lecturer for our World Wetlands Day event in 2019 to speak about this Global Peatlands Initiative. And this actually sparked a lot of discussion among here in Canada about how we could consolidate the Canadian peatland expertise into a network. And for those of you who were here the last 2 days, a lot of the discussion turned about how we can essentially realize that. So we're back. We're very happy, Diana, to have you back as our panel moderator. Please, Diana.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Philippe. And thanks for everyone that came out. It's cold outside. I came from Nairobi, Kenya, so I really do appreciate that that we're not in a storm like I was last time I was here, 2019. But it was a real honor to speak about that theme, which was wetlands and climate change, which I hope, since those thematic conversations are coming up through World Wetlands Day, we are actually seeing activation. But I'd love to just go straight to the heart of why we're here for the bulk of today and welcome our distinguished lecturer this evening. It's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Lynn Rochefort. Lynn is a professor in the Department of Plant Sciences and at Université Laval, and she is a leader in peatlands ecological restoration in Canada and one of the world's pioneers in this field. Lynn has worked with Canada's peat industry to develop peatland restoration techniques after extraction, and these techniques are now used around the world. So her groundbreaking work is really also starting to gain more momentum as we build a community of experts ready and able to make a dent for the UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration. Lynn, I'll invite you now. The floor is yours.
So it's really my honor to be here tonight. Thank you, Philip, and the 3 labs from University of Waterloo for inviting me, and I'm really glad to. So what I'm planning to do is actually to, I've put all the slides in French instead of like, I thought maybe some people tonight wants to practice their French. So, and then I will be speaking in English. So talking about their ecological role and restoration. So we'll embark on a journey really with hopefully some nice picture. And as Philip mentioned, the time this year, the theme of Ramsar for World Wetland Day is like, it's time to restore. Now, yeah, okay, just gonna try to see why it's not advancing here. Last year, the theme actually of Ramsar was like, you know, if you want to protect and manage in a responsible way peatland, you need to, you know them, and you need to like them. You really need to like them. So we have a long history of thinking of the peatland as, you know, this dismal, like the dismal swamps, or very places that you don't really want to go and hang about. So that was last year. And this year, funny enough, like in the material they're providing, then I will switch to my own material, they're defining what is a wetland, so which is area that are saturated with water long enough to have an impact on vegetation and all that. And then they go ahead and say all the different type of wetlands there is. And for the people that can read French, I'll translate. Do you see the word peatland, tourbière in there? Like, so we still have a lot of work to do, because in Canada, wetland equals peatlands, but for a lot of other parts of the world, you know, it's not something that is on the radar. And peatland are so beautiful, and we have so many names from them, and I'm missing still like names. I'm sure there's a lot of indigenous names that also exist. And this peatland here is really one that is dear to my heart, is the Grande Plaie Bleue nearby Quebec City. So this peatland is 1,500 hectares, and it's just 20 minutes from Quebec City. And I really like to I go there a lot for teaching and all that, but it's a peatland that you go there, and from 20 minutes from the city, you are in the wild. It's the north coming to your door, and you don't see any power line. You don't see roads, nothing. It's really like the wilderness at your door. So really pretty. Okay, so just to show some other pictures, like it's with lots of pools and all that. This is just a peatland nearby, and lots of diversity that you can find, pretty diversity. So I wanted to start a little bit with the prettiness of what you have in peatland. But what is a peatland? In Canada, peatland are formed by an ecosystem engineer that I like to call the sphagnum peat mosses. So in Canada, we have 2 main wetland eco engineer. We have the beaver for a lot of the wetlands, and then we have the sphagnum peat mosses for the bog and blanket bogs that we do have. And this is because the sphagnum are really, if it works here, as a very unique way of alternate. The botanical composition is really, really unique, of having dead cell alternating with living cell. That makes it porous, that makes it that can hold water, raise water by capillary, and then also because of the pores, there's a lot of oxygen. So it makes it a really good substrate, you know, for growing plants afterwards into it. So what is a peatland? Like, what you do is you have these peat mosses, and they grow all the time from the top, and they die at the bottom. And then with time, then you have these peat mass that accumulate over the land. So here you have a 6 meter of peat. This is a peat cliff that you have in New Brunswick. So the way it accumulates is that, like, the secret really is that every year you have an amount of production of biomass, but also every year a big part will decompose and only a small part will be making it into producing the peat. And the average of peat accumulation is between 0.5 to 1 millimeter per year. So if you have 6 meters, then you can say, okay, it took about 6,000 years for the peatland to form. So it gives you this idea. So just to go that the main peatland types, there's different peatland types. I would just go with 2 today. We have the bog that are acidic and mostly rain-fed, and they can raise up the water table above the regional water table in the landscape because of this capacity of the mosses to suck up water really by capillary rise. And this is an example here on Miscou Island in New Brunswick that are raised, and the trees around, you can barely see the trees. And sometimes you have lichens, although not only, there's a mix here of mosses and lichens, some drier parts. And then the other big part that we have are fans. And I thought this little graph here shows you, I talked to you about the raised bog, but the fans on the top of receiving water by precipitation, there's also runoff coming from the sides and also inflow of water, groundwater upwelling that can feed. And these type of fans then will be dominated more by sedges and different type of brown mosses. And here you see some type of fans we have in Canada that can be along rivers or big pattern fans that we have in the north. The rich fans are a little bit less known in Canada for 2 reasons. A lot of the fans have been drained for agriculture. So there used to be a lot of fans between, let's say, Quebec and Montreal, and now it's mostly cornfields or soya fields that you have on them. And then the ones that we have in the north, then they are little accessible and not easy to walk through them. So over time, they've been less studied. Peatland brings a lot of goods and services. So you will have, starting from the right, like for research, the great archives for climate, for contaminants, to look at being nuclear contaminants or nitrogen deposition, things like that. They are praised for, like, a lot of people go for bird watching, photography, in terms of the human services they can provide. It's like if you drain them, then in different places, it will be for agriculture or forestry. I will come back a bit on that on the agriculture. In other countries, it will furnish some fuel for energy, but this is really now on the decrease everywhere in the world. I think little power plants are left now on the planet, which also is a good thing. And then you can go there and collect small berries, medicinal plants, tea, or ceremonial plant, plants for different spiritual ceremonies, ecotourism, and then the as a peat growing media. And then we'll talk about that. But peatlands also provide several ecosystem services. Like, I think the main key characteristic of the peatlands are the carbon sink. They can be sources of water, good quality of water. They have a function of filtration, regulation, and then there's a whole array of biodiversity that comes with peatland, either at the regional level, habitat, or at the landscape level. So that's going to be my only a little bit talks about the statistic that we heard. So the peatlands now we know cover about 500 million hectares, which is 3%, okay, of the terrestrial surface. And this is like the latest statistics that was gathered by the Global Peatland Assessment launched in 2022 under the a sponsorship of the Global Peatland Initiative. But even though they're only 3%, they stock more carbons and more efficiently on the longer term than any other terrestrial ecosystem. So around 600 gigaton, which is equivalent, close to equivalent of what you can find in the atmosphere. And then peatlands talk about 30% of all the soil carbon, which is also twice more than the all the forests that we have on the planet. And then right now we have estimated that about 50 million hectares of peatlands in the world have been drained, mostly for pasture land and agricultural use or different infrastructure on this, which represent all the drained peatland about 4% of all the global carbon emission. So like just to, so I'm giving you the statistics just to make you realize the role that they play, and that's why we're getting more and more focus on that we need to better manage them. So we have quite a challenge to at least restore 50%. Like if we want to really meet our climatic mitigation goal, we should try to restore 50% of the peatland that are degraded, so 25 million hectares by 2030. So this is to maintain the global warming at or below 1.5 to 2 degree. There's a whole logic behind this. I will not go through that, but just to say that, you know, there's been modeling and all that, why we should target that. And also in Canada, and people among in this group that have been working on that, that we know that if the sooner you do restoration, once you finish using it, either like you abandon fields, agricultural field, or after peat extraction, the sooner you do it, the better it is for the climate, because of really having an action on cooling the climate, not only on the carbon thing, but for sooner having an effect that way. So what I'd like to now move on is more like the context of how we develop peatland restoration in Canada. It really started at the end of the 80s, at the same time as a lot of the society started, Society of Agricultural Restoration, that we started to be aware that we have maybe to do something better in management. And the Canadian peat industry then decided to add a famous workshop, I remember in Fredericton in New Brunswick, to say, hey, should we do something, or we just leave it, or do we do like just business as usual, since we've been doing since 1930s? And then they really decided that it's better that they try to do better management, you know, practices on the lands once they finish extracting peat. One thing is we know is if you just abandon a peatland, it does not go back by itself to a natural peatland. And I can just tell you that since 1992, this is one of the private sector in Canada that has been investing up to $22 million in developing restoration techniques. So at COP 15 that I participated in Montreal, they kept saying all the time, we need to involve the private sector. The private sector had to be there if we want to do ecosystem restoration. They really we have to embark them. And I think this is maybe one model for other sectors in Canada, that like you have to really be proactive and go ahead. So I will come back after that on not only, I can tell you this industry is investing in restoration, but they know they have to also work on alternative, and they're investing in finding alternative to growing media. So this is ongoing research. So the historic of research what we've done, you have to remember that at the beginning of the end of the 80s, beginning of the 90s, nobody had really ever manipulated mosses in the time in the sense of propagating them and how to reintroduce that into the landscape. So then we did a growth chamber and to look at what kills that? What does it take? What is it the constraint in the environment that we have to control so they will survive? Because the peat substrate, it's dark. And then when you have the sun on this, it cracks, it gets dry, it can get up to 60 degrees. So that kills sphagnum in almost no time. Then we work on see how to propagate all of that in greenhouses, in the field. Then we started to do restoration at small scales, and now we're doing it, a lot on large scale, up to, more than 5 to several hectares now. And I will not give really a course on restoration, but we found there's a lot of science to just that backs up these 7 steps. And sometimes people think, oh, let's skip that steps, but there's a reason why each step is there. So there's these more like the guidelines exist, and there's new one that just been produced in 2020. And then there's Marie-Claire Leblanc here that's been working on them as a co-author, and just this is available for free. You can download it from this website. So one of the first things we need to do is really, if you look here, there's a lot of frost heaving if you leave it and all that. So we need to rework and get rid of the biocross and everything that forms. So we do a soil preparation. That's the first step. The second one is we need to find material for introduction. And often we will use sites that are targeted to become an industrial site, or I work with the Ministry of Transport, say, if you know that the road's going to be built, like with salvaged material, or where they're going to open next. But in general, you need about 1 square meter to restore 15 square meter, or 1 hectare to restore 15 hectares. And then you can manage the other size to go back and collect and get your plant material from there too. So there's different ways. And then we have sphagnum farms that we've been using also for producing the material for restoration. So after that, we've been developing techniques like using manure spreader to once we carry all the material onto the peat surface to spread it. And then we need to add a straw mulch, a mulch to protect, to create a humid microclimate, because the mosses have no roots. They really need to, up the time that they develop to become a mat again or a cushion, they need protection. And then we need a step. I will not go too much into the detail of adding phosphorus fertilization, which is to, in the whole process, we need a nursing plan at the beginning, because the mosses have, they are like late successional plants, the sphagnum mosses. So the Polytrichum strictum is a plant that has like little rhizoid, and it can bind and really stop all the frost heaving that we do have in Canada. So it's just one of the steps, because it goes through succession. It's not right away, from day one that you get a peatland. You need time, a little bit, for the vegetation to evolve. Like exactly after fire. I took this idea from how the boreal forests regenerate after fire. And then after fire, often a carpet of Polytrichum, they will come back. And then the last step is rewetting, because you don't want to rewet while you're working onto the surface. So I've kind of presented the steps, and then now we'll take a break, and I will show you a little video, 3 minutes. That so then the last steps, then we did a lot of monitoring, because then are we achieving our goals? And one of the main goals was really to restore the main characteristic of peatland, which is then, to sequester carbon back into the ground. There you go. I think it's like, oh, at least this little one is working. So So we just want to show here, like 20 years after restoration, you know, what it can give. This is one of the research station that we've been working a lot. It's called Bois de Belle nearby Kakuna. So the result of restoration that we can reestablish, and I don't know why there's all these timer. I thought we had got rid of them, but so after 3 to 5 years, we get typical plant community coming back. And then between 5 to 10 years, 69% of the bryophytes do come back, and 82% of the vascular plant. And why I put this number, then 62/68, is that the average number of recovery of the vascular plant for prairie restoration is 62%. And then for the average wetland restoration is 68 from the literature. So like we're getting really, really good with 82% within 5-10 years of the restoration of biodiversity is really, really good. Then we're getting a lot of good habitats for the birds. And, you know, within 15 years, I don't know why now, like somehow we got a timer inserted, but I had no timer, I tell you, I don't like timer. So within 15 years, then we had less, we can be a sink of carbon again. So far, within the horticultural peat industry, they've done 128 restoration projects across Canada. You see here by the different province. And they have restored 10,000, more than 10,000 hectares since 1995. So there's not a lot of private sector like mining company, take a copper mine or that, you know, maybe have done as many restoration sites all across Canada if we look into ecosystem restoration. So just to say that, that's why I feel like it's some of the responsibility that private sector should have to really embark and go for restoration. Then we are working a lot now on a little bit like doing more like to enhance the restoration by looking at the pools creation or making sure sometimes some community wants more to have more small berries or the mosaic. So with the pool creation, I tell you, like within the same year we're creating the pool, we can have up to 17 species of odonata, that dragonflies that will come back. And then we have amphibians coming back too. So this, I don't know, like in the lab, maybe there's been several articles about the return of insects, spider, the water beetle, like different component of the biodiversity that we've been evaluating. We have produced a little guide on how to grow small berries in peatland. And here you see a project that was done with the Innu nation where there was a training one summer and they came and helped in the restoration on a recent project that for over almost like 5-6 weeks. So as we need to have them over. Another thing that we're working a lot is that, okay, we learn how to restore like the peat field, but how do you go about to connect with the other landscape? So now we're doing a lot of work on restoring the connection between forest, peatland, or like the different parts of it. And we work a lot on recreation of a mosaic, because sometimes a part will be a fen, a part will be a swamp, a part will be a bog. So this is also some other parts that we're working. So how am I faring? Fine, okay. So now what's next? Yeah, what's next in Canada? Where should we go? There's a lot of things I can tell you that I know what we can do and what we cannot do, or when we need still research and gaps. And this method of learning to manipulate sphagnum mosses in Canada, which represent 90%, of all our wetlands in Canada, can be now applied to a lot of other type of disturbance. And I'd like to share with you a little bit where are the disturbance in the peatland of Canada. And we just done this survey with the global peatland assessment. And this is what we have. So the main disturbance on peatland has been the drainage for agriculture. So close to 1,003,000 hectares. But at the bottom, this is the latest figure we have in Canada, close to 120 million hectares of peatlands, which makes it we are like the country with the greatest extent of peatland. Second, in terms of degradation, is the oil and gas industry. And having said that, a lot of these data are really incomplete. And this is to help us to say, where are the gaps? And we have a lot of gaps in Canada in knowing our statistics. And this, if I'm not mistaken, and then there's people in this room that helps to produce this graph. There's this 370,000 hectare for oil and gas is the statistic for Alberta. So it doesn't include oil and gas in Saskatchewan or BC, like there's some of the other provinces. What you have in parentheses is that what has been managed post the active life, of, let's say, oil pad or different infrastructure. So the oil and gas industry have been restoring, treating or planting trees for over 1,000 hectare, so 1,000 out of, so there's a lot of legacy, as you see there. Then there's the flooding by the hydro dams, this 245,000 hectare. And this is only the statistic for the province of Quebec. I did not succeed to get the other ones. And we know, like in Newfoundland, we have the Churchill Fall and Muskrat Falls coming. And there's a lot of other dams that are not accounted for. Just somehow that in Quebec, there's the wetland maps, but they know also they can overlay a lot their impact, and then we could have some statistics. Just the power lines, the power lines again, this is only the statistics in Quebec. So what that means, this impact of 12,600 hectares is that the power lines can be entrance to invasive plants mostly. So we know this always is based again on studies that we know that in bogs, invasiveness will be less, but in fence, it's going to be easier for invasive plants to get into the system. So we have buffer zone, and then we look at the linear with, that strip where we think there's going to be an impact, and that's how we get these figure. Then the drainage for forestry, again, that statistic only exists for the Quebec province, 69,000 hectare, and then all the other roads that we put here, roads, train tracks and all that, for an impact over the peatland of 56,000 hectares. And again, this is only the statistics of Quebec. We really need to work to get the statistics in the other provinces. And then the peat extraction that I've just been talking, that we've been working with this industry as ecological footprint, if you want, of almost 25,000 hectares. So they are operating currently on 21,000 hectares of peatland, and there's maybe, a 4,000 or 5,000 left to restore. But so far they restore, like I told you already, 10,000 hectares. So since 1930s, they restore 74% of their ecological footprint so far. So that makes it, we have close to 2 million hectares of degraded peatland to work on in terms of restoration. So which makes it about 1.7%. So for us, we will really, I think, have to pay attention, I think, the agricultural sides if we want to improve like to work towards the goals of restoring 30% of our degraded ecosystem in Canada. So this, like I said, this method can be applied to linear disturbance, to oil pads and different type of roads. This is just to show you, like, we have a more than 425,000 oil pad only in Alberta, so like they can be a lot of work for the years to come for all the students studying ecosystem restoration. And then we have, lots of road, and then we're moving north, like all our road system. So we know how to do things better, and I just hope that all the developers now will rely more on what we know in the science, what we've learned in the past 20 years, because we really have done a lot of research on restoration in Canada. So just to show you here, this is a project done with Hydro-Quebec. There was like this kind of a road into a peatland. There was a meter of this type of rocky material. And just 2 years later, sphagnum was growing and all that hydrology was restored across. So it's feasible. This is the restoration. That's all right. That's too loud. So this is in Alberta, the restoration of roads within peat extracted peatland. No. But the mic is not working. Is it? 1, 2, 1, 2. No, the mic is not working. Okay, so the mic is working. So more or less, I just wanted to show you on the lands, because we have a, large landscapes. And is there something that I know, like mostly in Alberta, they've learned a lot to work with machinery and then to work in the winter. So here what you see is that it can be really, really costly, and sometimes to remove all the materials. So in general, like the material that we use to build a road is buried underneath, and then at least you need 50 centimeters of peat on the top, so that you can restore the hydrology, and then you hope that with the water table coming back, and it's really a lot about having the right water, the right level when you're restoring. So here you see one of these oil pad. And when we restore, we really need to get rid of the surface material to be above the level of the hollows, what you see on your left. And here you see, this is one of the projects that I work with my SRAC and the group at Peace River of oil pad, with having lots of now mosses growing back. So in Canada, like, we can restore. I think like there's a lot of evidence. I know we can work on restoring seismic line, this oil pad, exploration pad, roads impacting peatlands. I said the seismic line, but even airfield, there's been a project done on that. So we really have accumulated a lot of knowledge, and we can do it. And that's kind of my message that I'm telling to the petrol, oil and gas industry. Like, you have invested also in research, but I think now it's time to do a little bit more implementation. So that's part of it. So if you want to hear more about peatland restoration, then there's this conference we talk about that Susan announced, like on reclamation, restoration, and rewilding. So you're welcome to come, and then we can pass to this is like 2 of the students, my lab, that did help with the graphics. So thank you very much, Miigwech.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Lynn. And despite all the technical glitches, finished on time. Fabulous. And it is time to restore. How much is enough? We don't need things to be perfect. We need to take action. So thank you so much for that message. Now we're going to go, you can have a seat actually, Lynn, because you're not off the spot. This is panel time. We're going to, first of all, invite some questions for the floor before we get into the panel. Are there any questions, burning questions that anyone has for Lynn on this amazing journey through restoration action? If there's no burning questions, are we having any online? We have one? Yes. Okay. Heather? Absolutely. Yes. So were the statistics that you mentioned during your presentation all from the 2022 Global Peatlands Assessment Report? Yes, they were. Okay, there they go. Yeah. Yes. And, that Global Peatlands Assessment was a compilation, a collaborative effort of more than 220, actually, I can't say more than 226 people, experts, authors from around the world contributed to the overall Global Peatlands Assessment. And Lynn was coordinating lead author for the North American chapter.
With 1, 2.
No.
1, 2. Yeah, so the statistics comes from there, and we decided really to rely on what each of the province could give us, and really there's teams that knows a lot. Like, okay, if we talk about gaps, a lot of the province know almost to the hectare how much peatlands they do have, like BC knows well, even Yukon and all that. Where we have gaps is like the Nunavut and Northwestern Territories. So this is one of the place we will have to work. And then if we think restoration also, where is the gaps in terms of work is the fan. We have not worked how to restore fans. And also we need to do a lot more work on swamp restoration. This is, I think, some of the future research that we'll need to do.
Thanks, Lynn. And I think the great information that was shared earlier is that the Canadian Peatlands Network, which is growing and building, is going to be also able to plug in to that global network of experts that are available and exchange across experience, ecosystem experience, temperate or otherwise. Yes. You can grab.
I missed your last part. So you said, okay, talking about, yeah, agriculture. This is, yeah. Yeah. Okay, I think we have to start somewhere. So first, the team, like when I say the team of authors amongst us for the North American chapter, including the US, we did not find examples. We don't have examples in Canada that people that have worked on restoring peatlands that have been drained for agricultural lands. I think the EU has done on some of the potholes, maybe in the prairies, like so going back on some of the wetlands. So this is an area where we have to work, and I think we should start by lands that finally, because we've been more intensive and all that, and maybe the land that were limits, in terms of production. I think we should look into that. But what we're realizing is that there's a lot of places we don't know where they are. like I can give you just even myself in my backyard. There's a place like there's a peatland that I trying to protect because they want to build a highway through it, and we don't need that highway like a lot of people, but it's another story. But I just realized, like looking into it, I said, this is like the second biggest peatland in my region. And then somebody sent me an article, but 3/4 of it was drained in 1948 for 125 farms. And that's, I didn't know that myself. So just to say, we will have to look more closely, maybe where were the peatland and if there's abandoned. So like there's some work to be done there.
Yes. Sorry. What can kids do? What can kids do to help peatlands?
Okay. What kids can do to help the peatland?
What can kids do to help the peatland?
Okay, what kids can do to help the peatland? I think I'd say you start. It's like it's working. Okay, I think the best thing is to start by visiting them, and knowing all the nice biodiversity that is in there, like knowing butterflies or dragonflies and some of the main plants. Going to see the carnivorous plants that exist. And it's only through knowing the biodiversity that you can know what you have to protect and why you can convince a lot of other people to protect the wetlands.
Yes, so get a magnifying glass. Actually, some of the magical treasures of peatlands you can see only really through a magnifying glass. And there's a lot of incredible photographers as well that are doing those macro lens photography, which you could also be passionate about. But indeed, peatlands are tiny, they're mighty, and they're like a mini rainforest in the carbon capture that they pack. Let's move on to our next segment, which is a panel. Today we have a great diverse panel, diversity in the representation from some key sectors, academia, industrial association, and conservation. We're not so diverse in the gender stakes, but hey, come on up, ladies. Kristen Maynor is a wetlands stewardship specialist at Ducks Unlimited Canada. She holds a Master's of Science in Earth and Environmental Science from McMaster University. And next we have, thank you. Yeah, Marie-Claire Leblanc is the Canadian Sphagnum Peat Moss Association's leading restoration expert. We need to talk to Marie-Claire, learn a lot more. She holds a Master's of Land Use Planning and Regional Development from Université Laval. And of course, we're joined here by our distinguished lecturer, Lynn Rochefort. So since we had the pleasure, technical hitches all on every side. It's okay. That's another quick way to take restoration action. Just wet it up. Make it wet. Make it wet. Yes, that's okay. So I'm going to invite first Kristen to tell us a little bit about, introduce yourself, mostly also focusing on your work related to today's World Wetlands Day theme, which is it's time for wetlands restoration. And then next, Marie-Claire will introduce herself. Then we'll have a little bit of a question and answer. I'll invite you from the audience, but also I have some sneaky questions here. I know they're burning questions in your minds, or maybe we'll also be able to take some more online. So first of all, over to you, Kristen. Welcome.
Thank you. Oh, yeah. Thank you. And I'm so sorry for creating a mini wetland habitat. Yes, thank you everyone for inviting me here today, Diana and everyone else. I'm really honored to be a part of this panel. As Diana mentioned, my title is Wetland Stewardship Specialist, and I work for Ducks Unlimited Canada's National Boreal Program. And I caveat my introduction with that because I really am focused on boreal wetlands, peatlands in particular. But in preparing for this, I thought that I would be really not doing Ducks Unlimited Canada service if I didn't talk a little bit about our restoration programs in mineral wetlands, maybe a little bit closer to home in Ontario here as well. So first off, I learned this week that we're celebrating our 85th year in Canada, which I think is a huge accomplishment for our organization. So in our 85 years here, we have over 12,000 habitat projects that we've implemented across the country, 6.2 million acres conserved, and specifically 3.1 million acres across the country that have been restored. And those are wetlands and adjacent upland habitats that support wetlands. And I speak in acres. I know it's a DU thing. But I did want to also mention that we have a very ambitious goal to double the number of acres that we will restore by our 100-year anniversary, 2038. So hopefully up to 7.3 million acres by that time, if everything goes well. So that's the national perspective in our restoration programs, which largely focus in mineral wetland environments. That being said, I work for our boreal program, and my focus is largely on science communication and connecting the research to practice, which is one of the reasons that I'm in Waterloo this week, liaising with different research groups to talk about solutions that can be implemented by our partners, specifically industry partners, to do more effective peatland conservation and restoration on the ground. That being said, I have a little bit broader experience in consulting, and I also did work for Conservation Halton and Credit Valley Conservation for a brief stint, a little bit closer here to the GTA. So working a little bit more in wetland regulation in that sense, and seeing some of the impacts within a highly urbanized environment to wetlands. I talked about our acres that are conserved and restored. I think one of the celebrated parts of our boreal program in particular is the number of acres that we've influenced through what we call sustainable land use programs in particular. And that number is truly astounding. So to date, we have over 228 million acres where we've influenced either through policy or sustainable land use practices, the conservation of wetland environments in these areas. And again, it's acres, I apologize, but I did look up what that is in square kilometers, and it's an area roughly equivalent to the size of the province of British Columbia that we have influenced over the course of our work in predominantly the boreal forest region. So we have a lot of active programs, particularly in peatland environments, and we are really interested in engaging with academia and transferring the results of a lot of the research to practices that industry can implement on the ground. And I will leave my introduction there, but looking forward to the rest of the questions.
Thanks. Thanks so much. Sorry, I was multitasking there. Now, Mary Claire.
Hi, everyone. So Marie-Claire Leblanc, I'm working as a communication and project manager at the Canadian Sphagnum Peat Moss Association. Lynn has presented part of the industry. Thank you, Lynn. I am a restoration expert, or also environmental affairs responsible. I'm pretty new to the industry, working for the industry. I have been there for 2-3 years now, and I have spent a decade working with Lynn at the Peatland Ecology Research Group, where I had the chance to be, first of all, visiting most of the peatlands that have been restored by the industry, but also to be part of the restoration process, either by planning or supervising some of the work, or shoveling peat myself in most cases. So I did have the chance to visit most, I think, of the 128 research projects you mentioned earlier across the country. I thought I would also present the CSPMA. So the CSPMA represents 15 peat producers across Canada. We are not a big industry. We have seen also we don't necessarily have a big impact, but we are an important one in terms of, yes, we do a lot of restoration, and we also want to represent leadership in terms of best management practices and restoration. I think we have the chance to be an industry that has the power and takes the power to restore. We have also been involved in peatland restoration science for over 30 years, Wetlands group, but also other ones across the country. We were part of, I was part of the CAD-PEAT project today. That's another example. So research and science has always been the core of what we do. No presentation would be a presentation without numbers. So just to give you a sense of what we do, what we call the total footprint. So all the areas where the peat industry had an impact since the beginning of peat harvesting in the 1970s, let's say, 1930s, let's say, that represents 35,000 hectares. From that area, well, that represents 0.03% of all Canada's peatlands. And we saw also from the GPA table earlier, that's about 1% of the land disturbances across Canada. From that area, 60% at the moment is in extraction. 68% of the remaining 40%, which we call the post-production areas, 68% have been restored already. 3% have been reclaimed, and the remaining 13% that are unrestored, we're actively working on them through different initiatives. One of them being the National Peatland Restoration Initiative, where we not only restore peatlands we have obligations on, but all the other ones that were never really included in those, they're not per regulation. They don't have any need for restoration. So we take care of those as well. So I just wanted to give you a sense of how big and how important our industry is and what we do for restoration. Looking up for more questions.
Thanks so much. We see that the ecosystems that we're talking about, wetlands, peatlands, are really so important. Only 2.5% of water on Earth is fresh water, and most of this is stored in glaciers and aquifers. Less than 1% is usable. 0.3% is found in wetlands, such as rivers and lakes. Fresh water is rare, and wetlands provide most of it. So that's also another reason why we need to take care of them. I want to ask a few questions, or also ask the audience if they have any immediate questions. But what I want to first ask is, we're here in Canada, and this is a celebration of World Wetlands Day in Canada. Kristen, do you think that we're doing enough to restore wetlands in Canada? And what could we do more? What more could we be doing, and where?
Yeah. Absolutely. So I think that there has been a lot of leadership shown from the federal level, and particularly from the provinces, where there have been effective wetland policies implemented across the country. And I did want to take a moment to celebrate the recent implementation of the Yukon Wetland Stewardship Policy, which is a huge win in terms of policy implementation across the country. And of course, it's through policy that we see a mechanism that requires wetland conservation, mitigation of impacts, or restoration when there are unavoidable impacts to wetlands. However, with DU, we don't only work on the policy front. We work very closely, as I mentioned, with industry, including the CPSMA and other partners. And we find that it's often the social license of those groups that drives a lot of the conservation or restoration practices that happen on the ground. So we see a lot of avenues for continuing restoration, and a lot of promising outcomes so far. Perhaps what's missing is the provinces that continue to not have wetland policies to guide that process and show leadership in that space.
Mm-hmm. I mean, with the ongoing UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration, which is really, trying to turn this momentum of activation by private sector and public, restoration is a new business. In the US, actually, there's a huge return on investment on restoration projects. And I think that Canada and Canadians and experts like sitting here are probably already in high demand, but how do we then replicate that out? And also, Mary Claire, I'd like to ask you, how do we even know whether restoration is successful? What can we use as well to let us know?
Success is a big word. Not because it's not something is achievable or reachable, but it means a lot. It can encompass a lot. So I will try to present my my view on that based on what I know from the peat industry. I think the first thing really is to make sure that we have objectives. When we start a restoration project, it's really everything has to start from the project. And I forgot to mention earlier, but I will do it right now. We do have restoration guides. I have two of them if someone is interested. And really, we have a whole guide just about planning the work, thinking about what is it that you want to do, what's the ecosystem reference ecosystem that you want to rely to. So really having the right objectives. So for the peat industry, the objective has never been to bring back the same exact ecosystem that was there. It's always the functions. This is where we want to go. So bring back the carbon sequestration function and the biodiversity. These are really two achievable, I think, success indicators and functions that we want to bring back. We have the chance to have been linked and collaborating with science for 30 years. So we have the chance to know a number of things. Lynn was saying, like, I was looking at the slides, vegetation comes back within 3 to 5 years. 69% of the mosses come back or transferred from the donor sites to the restored sites. So that's the kind of thing that when we have the chance to have the science, it's easier to have success indicators, I think, then we know what to look at. So from my background, that's ecological restoration. The objective are linked to the success and the assessment of if it's successful or not. Of course, there are other projects where habitat creation could be another goal that we want to achieve. But we also have humans that are taking care of the peatlands. So maybe just bringing back an ecosystem, a peatland ecosystems, where people can just go and appreciate the place. That's another objective on top of the other ones. So success, it's not a one size fits all. I think we really have to go back to what is the goal of ecological restoration, bring back the functions. Of course, a peatland should be restored as a peatland, but after that, there's a bit of creativity to be applied. But we can certainly define some more specific success. Lynn, I kind of want to hear you about that.
And tell us a little bit more about the time scale.
Okay, like the time scale. I can say we can be really, really proud of what we have accomplished in Canada so far, because I was at COP15. I've been talking in side events. And there was a French guy that all his career has been restoring wetlands around the Mediterranean, the different countries around the Mediterranean in French, yeah, the Mediterranean. And he was really impressed with the speed of the recovery that we could get, with the vegetation. This is something, and getting, like this 82% recovery within 5-10 years compared to the average, which are more in the 60s for the other ecosystem, is pretty good. And what is it that we are missing? Well, orchid, like we have several species of orchids in peatland, and we see some coming back with times. We tried to work on that. I had a master's student working on that, but it's really hard to manipulate and reintroduce orchids. So this is the type of biodiversity that we are like missing, but I know like Bois des Bernes, now we have like 14 species back of orchids. So they do come back with time. So we need that. So that was like a bit on the speed of recovery of the vegetation, and it's in trajectories. And you need time to assess also like the trajectories. And we do know that even if a site was like we get low cover, but usually what is needed with the best thing that really is need to work. I think I've been lucky picking up bug to restore in my career, because I have no invasive. I'm not fighting invasive. And all the poor people that work on wetland restoration in Southern Ontario and Southern Quebec, they have Phragmites and then like all these, a lot of really naughty plants that they have to fight. So in one way, that's great, because anyway, we have a lot of cynon peatland, and that's what we have to work on. But where like, I think for me, I really think we have to look more closely. What did I say? There is policy. There's more like, I mean, all the big provinces have now wetland policy, including Yukon in the last 2-3 weeks. It's implementation of the policy, making sure we have more people on the ground to like, I think, yeah, the law is there. They are there, but we need to have the means to go and follow up. And for me, like all the ore industry, like the mining up north, nobody goes there. They do what they want in one way. So, and then like in my statistic, you see there was nothing else about like what are the copper mine, gold mines impacts on peat and all that. Like I didn't put the statistic of the beers that are in the Hudson Bay lowlands, you know, and you saw no statistic neither of all the several gold mines that there is in Yukon, the placer mines that are in peatland area. And then there's just, I think, a lot. And then the beer, we have the Ring of Fire project coming up in the Hudson Bay lowland. So I think we have to be really aware of where the next development are coming and impacting peatland. And we know a lot about how to do it better, but often the developer, there's still a lack of exchange between the developer and the scientists and the science that we know already about managing peatland.
Absolutely agree with you. And what other challenges would you say are facing those, you know, Kristen, about how do you bring back or care for like migratory species, populations? Lynn, you in your presentation, you mentioned, you know, the new emerging work about trying to connect the ecosystems. And I think we're really trying to look at a larger scale on the management, because it is really, you know, about the water and the flow. Kristen, tell us a little bit more about Ducks Unlimited work there.
Yeah, so speaking specifically to the work I do, and the largest challenge that I enjoy tackling is just making sure that any partners we work with truly understand what and where peatlands or wetlands more broadly are. So a lot of knowledge exchange, a lot of training, trying to get out on the land with partners so that we're all speaking the same language. We're talking about these ecosystems using the same language. So that's the challenge piece. The biodiversity piece, I think we've had some really great wins. Lynn talked about some of the biodiversity work you've done with respect to peatland restoration, which we've been following very closely, of course, with birds coming back. In the prairies and mineral wetland systems, we have a whole science branch of our organization called the Institute for Wetland and Waterfowl Research, with our scientists largely focusing on the success of our habitat projects and our restoration programs. And most recently, some of the results that I was hearing coming out of that group were that they are looking at developing a prairie biodiversity mapping tool. And they're finding in their early work that the biodiversity of restored mineral wetlands is equivalent to that of the natural systems within 5 years of restoration. And so some of these sites are fairly easy targets. They're just sites where we're putting in ditch plugs and returning the water table. And if you build it, the animals will come is kind of the message that we're hearing. So it's really promising. It's promising for waterfowl, it's promising for amphibians, but a whole host of other organisms. And I know we have a lot more focus right now on citizen science work so that we can start crowdsourcing some of the data that goes into some of these research projects that we work on. And I think that might be a good way for youth to perhaps get more involved in some of the research and science work.
Thanks. Yeah. Thanks so much. Are there any questions from the floor here? Any curiosities? Yes, please. Come on up to the microphone there.
I was wondering, like, in terms of peatland restoration, I can't imagine that it's like one solution like fits all peatland. So I was kind of like wondering like how if there were like kind of like a few common if there were like a few common approaches to like peatland restoration, or if it was more of like a case by case type of thing.
If I understand well, you were asking if like the peatland restoration approach or methods fits all, or if there's more adjustment to do case by case. Defensively, there is adjustment to do case by case, because you, depending on the residual chemistry and water level of that, you'll decide if you go towards a fen or towards a bog or towards a swamp. So that's really some of the adjustment, and then depending also on the the impact or the type of disturbance, you will have to do different things. There's even like restoration of peatlands. Okay, I talk about one approach coming from the mosses introduction, but peatland restoration can also mean, and this is really hard for a lot of people to grasp, but can mean to be cutting trees. They do that more in Scotland on the Blanken bogs, because there's been a program where they planted trees. But even us now, we are working on like I did it on peatland that we think the Grand Play Bleu, the one that I told you I'm using for teaching, that is due to become an ecological reserve. There's still big drains, and the big drains cause trees to invade in one way the peatland. So we cut all the trees because it helps to raise the water table, and then maybe with climate change, with the drawdown of the water table, we see more trees going into the peatlands. And then also we can think that with global warming, we have a higher frequency of fires in our boreal forest that will enter. So maybe by cutting, a fire belt, cutting some trees, will get the edge of peatlands wetter. So it may be like we have to open up to the way we're thinking of restoration. But for mostly the peatland that are surrounded by agricultural agricultural land, there's a lot of afforestation, and we are thinking to do project that to restore the peatlands, because if you get too much shade, you're losing your mosses, you're losing your diversity. It would be cutting the trees for restoration. So that's a different approach.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, hugely costly, actually. In Scotland, the biggest cost is plucking trees out and using a helicopter to get them out. It's something that we can't really afford. Yes. Go ahead to a microphone would be good, so that our people online can also hear.
Yeah, I just had a question, again, another restoration question. You were just talking about in these northern environments where, like, again, there's not a lot of data on the effects of like copper and nickel mining and then potentially how that impacts peatlands. I guess what I was wondering is that what is the aftercare like for a lot of your peatland restoration projects, and like how does this play in areas where they're often potentially remote areas, remote restoration projects? Like who's going to be responsible for that potential aftercare monitoring? It might, I don't know if it might depend on like whether it's industry, or is it like, does legislation even require these companies to do that? That was a really big question, but thank you.
Marie-Claire will start and then maybe I will complete.
So basically, the objective in an ideal world, we wouldn't have to go back. So really, it's not, we're not manicuring the sites. We really want to have an approach to restoration that is operationally efficient, that is ecologically sound, that makes sense for everyone. So ideally, when you restore a peatland, we have a rule, you usually don't go back, at least with industrial partners, before at least 3 to 5 years, because it looks awful. So you usually wait a little bit of time. So you don't want anyone to be afraid, but you would basically go on the first year, look at, okay, are the dams okay? Just have a quick look around. After that, first vegetation surveys can start around 5 years old, but you're not going to go there each year and monitor everything and take care of this and open that trap and cut that tree and, oh, maybe this one. No, that's not how it works. We really want to have, if Lynn was saying earlier, we really want to bring back a trajectory, and the objective is to bring back functions. So really we put everything out there. We say goodbye and hope for the best. So, and it does work this way. So really, the way we do it, we don't have to take care of it continuously. Although you are right, in certain regulations, for example, most of the peat producers in Canada are Veriflora certified. That's a third-party certification. And to get certified, you have to go back and do vegetation surveys, so which is good. But basically, the method does not require that. And then also we need patience and we need time to restore. We can't expect to have results on the first year or first years. So yeah, voila.
Okay, and just to add to that, I always had in mind, okay, when for my whole career, to try to design restoration that if it's the cheapest way we can do it, then more will be restored. If it's too expensive, people will not do it. So that was always my approach. And when I started, some of my first founders, so it was not the National Research Council, like it was other group, and working with Johnson & Johnson, they wanted me to said like, you're just a biologist, just a biologist knowing mosses. You would need engineer, like you need to get engineer firm, and I didn't want. I said, if I get engineer there, it's gonna cost the earth. Sorry for the engineers, but and I've seen it, the way with the U.S. scope of engineer, and the projects are pretty costly. Some of the projects, in the U.S. In wetland restoration. So I always believe in the training with people that do work already in the peatland. And I tell you, we have a lot of people that knows up in the north how to deal with heavy machinery in these boggy swamps without sinking all the machines and working with the winters and all that. So we do the restoration. You do like, I tell you, we can do 12 hectares within 3, 4, 5 days, and that's it. After that, you're finished. Like within a week, you do your 10 hectares and you let it go. Like, you've blocked your ditches, you block what have you, and you just, so what you have to check is, like Marie-Claire said, you have to go back to see if a beaver comes in. So maybe we undo beaver dam because if it's flooding too much. But anyway, we try to really keep it that it's not overly expensive. And just to tell you a difference, in the US, there's published paper, like for restoring some of the peatlands in the mountains, it's like $89,000 per acre. And then here we can restore with like a range of between $3,000 to $5,000, $6,000 per hectare. So like, it's quite a difference.
So thanks very much. I think we're at the end of our evening here, but if you have some more questions, I'm sure Lynn and Mary Claire and Kristen and others will be available to catch as we mingle and wrap it up. But I just wanted to say that there is a certain type of person that needs to be involved in this sort of work that's dedicated, that's persistent and patient, because honestly, nature takes time to heal, but it also nature takes time to create these magical places like peatlands. So let's give them the time that they deserve, but also run to them quickly, because it is honestly time to restore. So handing back over to you, Philippe, for the closing. Thanks very much to our panelists and our distinguished lecturer.
So thank you very much, Diana. And yes, again, thanks to our amazing lecturer and panelists for a very interesting discussion.